The windshield wipers of the old Ford F-150 fought desperately against the Montana blizzard, but they were losing. Adrian Carter gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the worn leather as snow swirled like angry ghosts across Highway 93. In the rearview mirror, 18-month-old Sam slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware that their world was about to change forever. 3 years ago, Adrian's father had looked him in the eye and said the words that shattered everything. "You're no son of mine." Tonight, as the certified Tesla technician drove through nature's fury, he carried more than just the weight of rejection. He carried the fragile hope of redemption, wrapped in a tiny boy who had never spoken a word. Sam had been found behind Miller's garage 6 months earlier, bruised, silent, and abandoned like yesterday's newspaper. The social workers had called Adrian crazy for wanting to adopt. A 28-year-old gay man with no family support. The system wasn't built for people like him, but Adrian had seen something in Sam's eyes that mirrored his own childhood. The look of someone who had learned too early that love could disappear without warning. The phone call had come just as the storm began. "Mr. Carter, we need to schedule your home inspection for next week. The final evaluation." Adrian's hands had trembled as he agreed to the appointment. One mistake, one wrong answer, and Sam would vanish into the foster system forever, just like Adrian had vanished from his family's Christmas photos. His grandfather's voice echoed through the howling wind. "Son, we don't save people because they deserve it. We save them because we need to become the kind of people worth saving." The old man had passed these roads countless times, helping stranded travelers long before cell phones existed. Now Adrian carried that legacy, even though it might cost him everything. The Range Rover appeared like a mirage through the white chaos. Its hazard lights blinked weakly. A luxury vehicle worth more than Adrian made in 3 years, trapped against the guardrail. Most people would have driven past. The storm was getting worse. Sam needed to get home, and strangers meant complications. But Adrian had learned something in 28 years of being different. When you've been left behind, you recognize the sound of someone else's distress call. He pulled over, engine idling, watching the expensive car disappear and reappear in the swirling snow. The woman inside was unconscious, her lips blue with hypothermia, designer clothes soaked through. A Patek Philippe watch that could have fed a family for months. But none of that mattered now. Death didn't care about bank accounts. Adrian broke the passenger window with his emergency hammer, glass crunching under his boots as he lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight and cold as winter stone. Adrian carried her to his truck, where Sam had finally woken up. The baby watched silently as Adrian settled the stranger in the passenger seat, his dark eyes processing everything with an intelligence that seemed too old for his small face. The drive to Adrian's cabin took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. The woman's breathing was shallow, her skin pale as moonlight. Adrian found himself talking to her, the way he talked to Sam when the nightmares came. "It's okay. You're going to be okay. I've got you." His grandfather's cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that civilization had forgotten. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a wood-burning stove that had kept 3 generations of Carter men warm. It wasn't much, but it was honest. The mortgage payment took most of Adrian's paycheck, but it was home. More importantly, it was where Sam had learned to trust again. Adrian carried the woman inside, laying her on the old sofa his grandmother had covered in hand-sewn quilts. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had spent years fixing broken things. Wet clothes peeled away with clinical precision, warm blankets wrapped tight. The wood stove fed until orange flames danced like hope against the darkness. The honey tea was his grandmother's recipe, sweet and warm, meant to call souls back from dangerous places. Adrian spooned tiny amounts between the woman's blue lips, patient in his prayer. Sam crawled closer, reaching out one small hand to touch the stranger's fingers. Even at 18 months, the boy understood suffering. As the cabin filled with warmth and the storm raged outside, Adrian wondered who this woman was. But it didn't matter. Tonight, she was simply someone who needed saving. And maybe, in saving her, he was saving something in himself that his father's rejection had tried to kill. Because sometimes when you've lost everything that was supposed to love you unconditionally, you discover that love isn't about blood or biology. It's about choosing to become shelter in someone else's storm, even when your own sky is falling. If this story touches your heart, follow Heart Stories for more tales of hope, healing, and the unexpected ways strangers become family. Subscribe now, because every story we share might be the one that changes everything. Clare Whitmore's eyes fluttered open to the scent of wood smoke and something she couldn't immediately identify: safety. The word floated through her consciousness like a forgotten melody. Her body ached as if she'd been run over by her own board of directors. But she was warm, incredibly, impossibly warm. The room around her defied everything she knew about poverty. Yes, the furniture was old, the walls needed paint, and the floorboards creaked with decades of use. But every surface gleamed with careful attention. Hand-sewn quilts covered her like grandmother's arms. The wood stove crackled with expert precision. Even the mismatched coffee mugs on the kitchen counter stood in perfect alignment. A man moved quietly between the stove and sink, his movements economical and sure. Adrian, she would learn later, though he hadn't offered his name. He worked with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to fixing broken things. When he turned, she caught sight of his face in the firelight. Kind eyes, weathered hands, and the careful expression of someone who had learned not to expect gratitude. On the floor near the sofa, a toddler sat surrounded by wooden blocks. The child's dark hair caught the firelight as he stacked and restacked his towers with methodical patience. He never made a sound, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room with an awareness that seemed ancient for someone so small. Clare tried to speak, but her throat felt raw as winter wind. Adrian appeared beside her with a steaming mug. Honey tea that tasted like childhood memories she'd forgotten she possessed. He helped her sit up, one hand steady against her back. Professional as a nurse, but gentle as a prayer. Why the word finally emerged. Barely a whisper. "Why did you stop, Adrian?" Settled into the chair across from her. Close enough to help if needed. Far enough to give her space. The toddler crawled over and climbed into his lap with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his welcome. Because nobody deserves to die alone out there. His voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had tested that belief against hard experience. Doesn't matter who you are or where you're going, Storm doesn't care about any of that. Clare studied his face in the dancing firelight. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't demanded identification, hadn't even glanced at her Patek Philippe watch now sitting on the side table. In her world, people helped each other for networking opportunities, tax deductions, or social media content. This man had risked his life and his child's safety for a complete stranger, expecting nothing in return. The realization hit her like cold water. For 34 years, every interaction in her life had carried an agenda. Board meetings, charity galas, even family dinners served strategic purposes. When had she last experienced simple human kindness without calculating its cost? Sam climbed down from Adrian's lap and approached her slowly, the way children approach wounded animals. His small hand reached out and patted her arm, his dark eyes serious and knowing. Still no words. But his touch carried more comfort than 1,000 corporate sympathy cards. "He doesn't talk much," Adrian said softly, running his fingers through Sam's hair. "Had some rough times before he came to me. He's learning that the world can be safe again." Clare watched the interaction between them, the wordless communication that spoke of countless, quiet moments together. Adrian's hands moved in simple signs, and Sam responded with nods and gestures that formed their own private language. This wasn't just caregiving. This was love in its purest form. Unconditional, protective, patient as sunrise. Her chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. When was the last time someone had touched her without wanting something? When had she last felt this protected, this cared for, without having to perform or produce or prove her worth? The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the small cabin, something else was happening. Two completely different worlds had collided, and instead of destruction, They were discovering unexpected common ground. Both had learned that families could disappoint you. Both understood that sometimes the people who should love you most were the ones who hurt you deepest. As Claire sipped her honey tea and watched Adrian tend the fire while Sam played quietly at their feet, she began to understand something that all her business education had never taught her. Wealth wasn't measured in stock options or market share. Real wealth was this: a warm place when the world turned cold, gentle hands when you were broken, someone willing to share their safety without asking what you could give in return. Sometimes the most profound education comes not from boardrooms or universities, but from ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they believe it's right. And sometimes discovering your own capacity for gratitude teaches you more about success than any quarterly report ever could. Dawn crept through the cabin windows like a shy visitor, painting the world in shades of silver and hope. The storm had exhausted itself during the night, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow and silence. Adrian stood at the kitchen window, coffee steaming in his hands. Watching the sun reveal the Range Rover buried beneath nature's white blanket, Claire stirred on the sofa, her business instincts awakening before her body fully cooperated. Even in this remote cabin, her mind automatically calculated losses, missed meetings, delayed contracts, shareholders wondering where their CEO had vanished. But for the first time in years, those thoughts felt distant and unimportant. Adrian moved outside with the quiet efficiency of someone raised by Montana winters. His toolkit emerged from the truck bed like a surgeon's instruments, each piece selected with practiced precision. Claire watched through the window as he approached her vehicle, his breath visible in the crystalline air. His hands, already bearing the honest scars of mechanical work, began their careful diagnosis. The Range Rover's engine had surrendered to the cold, its sophisticated systems no match for nature's raw power. But Adrian worked with the patience of someone who understood that broken things could be made whole again. He tested connections, cleaned terminals, and coaxed life back into expensive machinery with the same gentle persistence he showed Sam. Claire found herself studying his movements with unexpected fascination. In her corporate world, problems were solved by writing checks or firing people. Watching Adrian actually fix something with his hands felt revolutionary. Here was competence without arrogance, skill without self-importance. Her purse had fallen during the rescue, contents scattered across the passenger seat. As Adrian worked, a business card slipped from the leather folds and caught his attention. The embossed lettering gleamed even in the morning light. Clare Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, Whitmore Automotive Group. Adrian picked up the card carefully, as if it might explode. His calloused fingers traced the expensive printing, and something shifted in his expression. Not reverence or greed, but a quiet understanding that the woman he had saved lived in a universe far removed from his own. When he returned to the cabin, Claire was sitting up properly. Sam nestled beside her on the sofa. The child had brought her his favorite wooden blocks, offering them like precious gifts. She accepted each one solemnly, understanding that she was being trusted with something valuable beyond measure. "Your car should start now," Adrian said simply, placing her business card on the coffee table between them. CEO of Whitmore Automotive. That's quite something. Claire's chest tightened. Here it came, the moment when his genuine kindness would transform into calculated opportunity. She braced herself for the request, the subtle manipulations, the ways people tried to monetize proximity to power. Instead, Adrian poured himself fresh coffee and settled into his chair with the same quiet presence he had shown all along. "Makes no difference to what happened last night," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "You were someone who needed help. That's all that mattered then. It's all that matters now." The words hit Claire like a physical force. In her world, identity was everything. People genuflected before her title, calculated their words based on her net worth, shaped their entire personalities around what they thought she wanted to hear. This man had saved her life without knowing she could buy his entire town, and learning the truth hadn't changed his treatment of her by a single degree. "I built an empire," she heard herself saying, But I forgot how to build connections. Sam climbed from the sofa and walked to a shelf near the fireplace. His small hands reached for a framed photograph, which he carried back to Claire with ceremonial seriousness. The image showed Adrian with his arm around a young woman, both of them laughing in the sunshine outside what looked like a college campus. Claire's world tilted sideways. The woman in the photograph had her eyes, her smile, her stubborn chin. "Emma," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. Adrian went very still. "You knew Emma Porter." The coffee mug slipped from Claire's nerveless fingers, but Adrian caught it before it could shatter. "Emma Porter was my sister," she said, her voice barely audible. "She died 2 years ago in a car accident." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Adrian's face had gone pale, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of old grief. Emma never mentioned having a sister who was a CEO. She talked about her family sometimes, but we weren't close, Claire admitted, shame coloring her voice. I was too busy building my career, making money, proving I could compete in a man's world. I thought family would always be there when I was ready for it. Adrian stood and walked to a wooden chest beneath the window. From it, he withdrew a manila envelope, worn soft with handling. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing Emma and Adrian together at various stages of their friendship. College graduation, hiking trips, quiet dinners in small restaurants. "She saved my life," Adrian said simply. "When I came out in college and thought the world was ending, Emma sat with me outside the dean's office for 6 hours. She brought me soup when I was too scared to eat. She never made me feel broken or wrong." Claire studied the photographs with growing amazement. Here was her sister as she had never known her, full of and purpose and unconditional love. In every image, Emma glowed with the kind of happiness that Claire had spent her entire life chasing through quarterly reports and stock valuations. "She said something once," Adrian continued softly, "that if she ever had a family, she hoped they would meet someone like me. Someone who understood that love isn't about what you can provide, but about who you choose to protect." As Claire held the photographs of her sister's hidden life, she began to understand that some connections transcend coincidence. Perhaps the storm hadn't simply brought two strangers together. Perhaps it had been completing a circle that Emma's death had left open, connecting two people who needed each other more than either had realized. The most profound discoveries often happen not when we're searching for answers, but when we're brave enough to recognize that the questions we've been asking might have been wrong all along. The revelation about Emma hung in the cabin air like morning mist, beautiful and fragile, but reality had a way of shattering delicate moments, and it arrived exactly 1 week later in the form of a phone call that would test everything Adrian had built with Sam. Claire had returned to her world of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, but the memory of honey tea and unconditional kindness lingered like a song she couldn't forget. She threw herself into work with renewed focus. But colleagues noticed something different. The CEO, who once demolished opponents with surgical precision, now asked about their families, remembered birthdays, listened with an attention that felt revolutionary. Meanwhile, Adrian faced his own reckoning. The social worker arrived for the final home inspection on a Tuesday that felt heavy with judgment. Mrs. Patterson moved through the cabin with clinical efficiency, noting the modest furnishings, the second-hand toys, the careful way Adrian had child-proofed every corner on a budget that barely stretched to cover essentials. Sam clung to Adrian throughout the inspection, his small fingers twisted in his father's work shirt. The boy seemed to sense that this stranger held their future in her clipboard and disapproving frown. When she asked to see financial records, Adrian produced folders organized with desperate precision. Every receipt, every bill, every documentation of a life lived carefully within its means. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Patterson said finally, "your devotion to Sam is evident. But devotion doesn't pay for college, health care, or the kind of opportunities a child deserves." The words landed like physical blows. Adrian had anticipated questions about his sexuality, his single status, his unconventional family structure. He hadn't prepared for the simple mathematics of poverty to be his downfall. Then the media storm broke. Someone had recognized Claire's Range Rover outside Adrian's cabin. Someone else had connected the dots between the automotive CEO and the small-town mechanic. By Thursday morning, headlines blazed across gossip sites and business journals alike. Billionaire CEO's secret night with gay single father. Whitmore Automotive's image crisis. What really happened in the Montana snow? The story twisted with each retelling. Adrian became either a gold-digging opportunist or a victim of corporate manipulation. Depending on which narrative served the reader's prejudices, Claire transformed into either a saint slumming with the poor or a reckless executive compromising her company's reputation. Richard Whitmore, Claire's ex-husband and a rising political star, saw opportunity gleaming like fresh blood in the water. The conservative politician had built his career on family values and traditional marriage. The scandal handed him weapons he wielded with surgical precision. "My ex-wife's questionable judgment extends beyond boardrooms," he announced at a press conference designed to look spontaneous. When someone with her influence associates with unstable individuals, we must ask who's really protecting our children. The attack wasn't random. Richard had been fighting Claire for custody of their daughter Emma Rose, named for the sister Claire had lost. Every headline, every whispered rumor, every social media post became ammunition in a war where a little girl's future hung in the balance. Adrian watched his world crumble with the horrifying speed of an avalanche. Parents at Sam's daycare whispered behind raised hands. His landlord mentioned concerns about property values. The garage where he worked part-time received calls questioning his character, his competence, his right to be around other people's children. Mrs. Patterson called on Friday afternoon with words that felt like a death sentence. "Mr. Carter, given recent developments and community concerns, we're recommending temporary removal of Sam pending further evaluation." The phone slipped from Adrian's numb fingers. Sam looked up from his blocks, those wise, dark eyes reading the devastation on his father's face with heartbreaking accuracy. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, the boy made a sound, not words, but a low keen of distress that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his small chest. Adrian sank to the floor and gathered Sam into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of the only family he had ever chosen. In 3 days, strangers would come to take away the person who had taught him that love didn't require blood or biology or anyone's permission. That night, as Sam slept fitfully against his chest, Adrian stared at the ceiling and contemplated the impossible mathematics of sacrifice. Maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe love wasn't enough when the world was determined to prove you unworthy. Maybe the kindest thing he could do was step aside and let Sam find a family that society wouldn't question, criticize, or tear apart for entertainment. The cruelest lesson life teaches isn't that good intentions guarantee good outcomes, but that sometimes the people who love most deeply are the ones who must choose between their own happiness and their loved one's safety. And sometimes the bravest choice looks exactly like giving up. The courtroom felt like a cathedral of judgment, where wooden pews held spectators hungry for drama and justice wore the face of a weary judge who had seen too many families torn apart by good intentions and bad timing. Adrian sat beside his court-appointed attorney, watching Richard Whitmore's legal team arrange their papers with the confidence of people accustomed to winning. Claire had made her choice 3 months earlier. The day after Mrs. Patterson's devastating phone call, she walked into her board meeting and resigned as CEO, effective immediately. The gasps of disbelief echoed through the executive conference room as she explained her decision with the same calm precision she once used to announce quarterly earnings. Some things matter more than stock prices. She had told the stunned board members, "I'm going to fight for what's right, not what's profitable." Now she sat in the courtroom's front row, no longer the polished executive in designer suits, but a woman who had learned that real power meant using everything you had to protect the people you loved. Her personal fortune, once reserved for market investments in luxury acquisitions, had been redirected toward legal fees and private investigators. The case should have been simple. Richard wanted custody of Emma Rose. Claire wanted to keep her daughter. But Richard's political ambitions had expanded the battlefield to include Adrian and Sam, making it a referendum on unconventional families and society's definition of suitable parents. Adrian's attorney was young, passionate, and working pro bono because she believed in justice over billable hours. When she stood to present her opening statement, her voice carried the conviction of someone fighting for more than legal precedent. Your Honor, this case isn't about Mr. Carter's sexuality or his income bracket. It's about a man who found an abandoned child and gave him safety, love, and hope for the future. The evidence came in waves. Character witnesses testified to Adrian's devotion, his patience, his transformation of a traumatized boy into a thriving toddler. Neighbors spoke reluctantly but honestly about the changes they had witnessed in Sam since living with Adrian. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Claire's private investigator had been thorough, following paper trails and DNA evidence that social services had overlooked. The manila envelope she handed to Adrian's attorney contained documents that redrew the entire landscape of the case. Your Honor, the young lawyer announced, we have definitive proof that Sam is the biological nephew of Ms. Clare Whitmore. DNA testing confirms that Sam is the son of Emma Porter, Ms. Whitmore's deceased sister. The courtroom erupted. Richard's composed facade cracked like ice under pressure. Sam, now walking steadily and beginning to use words, looked around the case with the same calm intelligence that had marked him from the beginning. But the DNA results were only the opening act. Security footage from the garage where Sam had been found told a darker story. The grainy images showed Emma Porter arriving late one night, visibly pregnant and terrified. She could be seen arguing with someone off camera before leaving Sam in a cardboard box with a note that read simply, "Please love him when I can't." The off-camera figure was Richard Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore threatened my sister," Claire testified, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "He told her that if she exposed their affair, he would destroy her and ensure the baby disappeared into the system forever." Richard's political career crumbled in real time as journalists live tweeted the proceedings. The family values candidate who had built his platform on traditional marriage and moral authority stood exposed as a man who had abandoned his own biological son to protect his public image. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Adrian retained full custody of Sam. Claire maintained custody of Emma Rose. Richard faced criminal charges for child abandonment and intimidation. But the real victory happened 6 months later, in a quiet ceremony at the Whitefish courthouse. Adrian and Claire exchanged vows with Sam toddling between them and Emma Rose scattering flower petals with the serious concentration of a 4-year-old performing her most important job. The Second Chances Automotive Training Center opened the following spring, housed in a renovated warehouse that had once stored broken dreams. Young people from across the country came to learn trades that would give them independence, dignity, and hope. Many were LGBTQ+ youth who had aged out of foster care. Others were single parents struggling to build better lives for their children. On the center's wall hung a photograph of Emma Porter, smiling in eternal sunshine, with a plaque that read, "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the chance to be who they were meant to be." Sam, now speaking in full sentences and calling both Adrian and Claire his parents with equal devotion, would sometimes stand before his aunt's photograph and whisper secrets only she could hear. Emma Rose, wise beyond her years, would take his hand and tell him stories about the aunt who had loved him enough to trust strangers with his future. The town of Whitefish had slowly, reluctantly, then enthusiastically embraced its unconventional first family. Mrs. Patterson, humbled by her own prejudices and the evidence of Sam's thriving development, became an advocate for placement policies that prioritize love over demographics. Years later, when Sam graduated valedictorian from Whitefish High School, his speech would center on a simple truth that had taken the adults around him much longer to understand. Family isn't about biology or tradition or meeting society's expectations. Family is about choosing to show up, day after day, for the people who need you most. The most profound victories aren't won in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when broken hearts decide to trust again, when different kinds of love prove their worth, And when communities learn that expanding their definition of family only makes them stronger, have you ever had to fight for love that others didn't understand? What would you sacrifice to protect the family you've chosen rather than the one you were born into? Follow Heart Stories for more tales of courage, hope, and the unexpected ways love transforms everything it touches. Because every story we share reminds us that the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with unwavering faith in what matters most.